Hello, thank you so much for joining me for this pre-recorded presentation on cannabis waste management in BC. It's just going to be me speaking today, and there's going to be a PowerPoint that goes along with this. My name is Kate Bergen, and I'm an Environmental Management Officer with the BC Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. This presentation will cover some basic best practices for waste management associated with cannabis operations, and I'm going to provide links and more resources to information that I cover in the presentation. So the presentation, as I said, will cover some best practices and provide information and resources for growing and processing operations in BC. And on this slide here, hopefully you can see it, you'll see some regulations that you need to be aware of. I'm going to not go into detail on all of the federal and provincial or municipal requirements because it is your responsibility to be aware of the different regulations and to ensure that you're not causing pollution. Whenever possible, I'll provide links and resources, as I've said, to more information, and I'll just touch on a few of the regulations to be aware of. So, of course, there's the federal cannabis regulations that provide information on good production practices and information on destruction requirements and odor management. We have the Environmental Management Act. This regulates waste discharges to protect human health and the environment. And then under the Environmental Management Act, we have a few regulations and practices to be aware of. I'll touch on a few different slides today on the Code of Practice for Agricultural Environmental Management. This Code of Practice sets waste management rules for the growing operations, growing of cannabis. And then I'll also touch on the hazardous waste regulation, which sets disposal rules and transportation rules for processing wastes and other potentially hazardous wastes. And I'll also touch a bit on the waste discharge permits. So these are required for some operations for processing. If you need to get a permit for air effluent, refuse discharge, or other processing wastes potentially. So the first topic I want to discuss today is the solid waste management and agricultural byproducts specifically. So agricultural byproducts are sometimes referred to as agricultural waste, but we're intentionally using this term byproduct just to highlight that many of these byproducts are not truly waste products. There's opportunity for reuse, composting, and recycling. So in the past, in order to meet federal destruction requirements, and even currently, many operations are still mixing their agricultural byproducts with expensive materials, such as kitty litter, and sending it to the landfill. And we just want you to know that for most operations, when you're growing operations, this is an unnecessarily not recommended process. Most of this material from your growing operation can be composted instead of landfilled. So agricultural byproducts from your growing operation include some cannabis waste potentially, as well as many other products. And cannabis waste, of course, must meet those specific federal destruction requirements, but other byproducts that most likely make up the majority of your waste do not have to meet these federal destruction requirements. And so I want to talk today about these other materials and your cannabis waste and how these are opportunities to compost. Those other agricultural byproducts may include non-viable seeds, stalks, fibers, roots, as well as soilless media, cocoa coir, and peat, and all of these products are ideal for composting. And of course, please note that some materials do need to be, some materials cannot be composted, like rock wool. So as I said, for many growing operations, agricultural byproducts can be composted while still meeting those federal destruction requirements. And I'm just going to outline some options for composting agricultural byproducts. But I, of course, am working with the Federal Cannabis Compliance Directorate. I've got the email address here. Whenever you're developing a new proposal, or if you have any questions at all about those federal requirements. So one option for growers is to ensure your cannabis waste is meeting destruction requirements is you can simply shred any of the waste that is cannabis and mix it with other compost feedstocks. As I said in that previous slide, which hopefully you have the slides, you can mix cannabis waste with those roots and stalks, the peat, coir, other growing materials, and you want to mix that with any cannabis with at least 50% of those other materials. And then the other compost feedstocks that you can add to your compost pile include agricultural products from your operation, such as maybe fruits and vegetables, dried leaves, wood waste, anything else that's that you have on your facility or from the growing. So I just want to go over a few more points on composting. I've got a few links here if you have the presentation to some excellent guides. We've got a guide to on-farm composting in BC. This is a great place to find information and best practices on composting. And I've also got the link here to the Code for Agricultural Environmental Management. I will refer to this throughout the presentation, and it's very long, so I'm just going to call it the AIM code, but it is Code of Practice for Agricultural Environmental Management, and you'll hear me say that a few times, so AIM code. So composting is, of course, a great way to waste and to produce compost. Compost is a great soil amendment. It provides nutrients. It improves your soil structure. So we really want to add back to our farm or back to our growing operation. You want to make sure that when you're composting that it's an aerobic process, aerobic process, meaning it requires, so when you've got your compostable materials in a pile, you want to make sure that you mix them. By mixing or turning the pile, you're going to get the feedstock materials mixed up, and you're going to get oxygen into that pile. So this also can help prevent strong odor. Compost piles may have a little bit of an odor, like an earthy smell, but if they're smelling like rotten eggs, something's wrong. You want to get some oxygen in there to keep those smells down. When you're turning your compost, that's also a great time to check for moisture, and then add water if your pile is too dry. Always add more dry feedstock materials to make sure you're adjusting that moisture content. One thing to keep in mind is that storing agricultural byproducts is not the same as composting. So if you're planning to just store a large amount of material, you do need to review the Code of Practice for Agricultural Environmental Management, that AIM code, for storage requirements, because you can't just leave piles of material for long periods of time without the proper rules on storage. All right, so on my next slide, hopefully you're following along. I'll just go over a few points about composting. Oh, sorry, no, moving on to liquid waste management. Apologies. All right, so whether you're managing an outdoor, indoor, or a greenhouse operation, you need to be aware of the requirements for managing your liquid waste. This can include leachate or fertigation water. So liquid waste cannot be directly discharged to land or water without a valid waste discharge authorization from the province. So in addition to this, if you're considering municipal drain disposal, you must also be aware that this is not an option in all locations. You do need to contact your local municipality to make sure that any waste that you're planning to dispose of meets the municipal discharge standards. So if you do have liquid waste that you need to dispose of, leachate potentially or fertigation waste. Some options for disposal include mixing it with your compost pile or storage pile, mixing it with other nutrient sources before applying to your crops. You can treat the waste before discharge, or you can send it off-site for an authorized third party for treatment. And again, I refer to that AIM code for more information on best practices and requirements. All right, so in addition to liquid waste, we also need to be properly managing nutrients. And this refers to nutrients that are being applied to land or to crops in containers. So this includes fertilizers and soil conditioners. Some key things that you want to keep in mind, you want to ensure that the nutrients never do not escape during transportation or piping when you're planning on applying them. You want to ensure that nutrients are not ever discharged to a water course, that nutrients are not crossing your property boundary, and that they're not entering the water table. And you also need to be aware of how much nitrogen you are applying and ensure that you do not apply more than what is needed for optimum growth. So important thing to keep in mind here is also to keep good records of any applications that you have made. And once again, referring to that AIM code for more information and other requirements for nutrients. Okay, so moving on to odor and air emissions. So as many of you be aware, the federal regulations do require air filtration systems on buildings where cannabis production occurs. Emissions are also encouraged to use the best achievable technologies. This could be carbon filters or biofilters to help control odors. And I've got a link here in the PowerPoint, hopefully you've got the PowerPoint, with a report that can help provide more information to growers. So although it's not a regulatory requirement, one good thing that we're recommending for managing odors is to develop an odor and air emission management plan for your operation. This is sort of a guidance on how you're going to follow best practices and ensure that you've done everything to manage and mitigate odors. So in a odor air emission management plan, you want to identify source of odors, both the location and timing, depending on making note of when odors, of course, are going to increase with flowering, drying, and different processes. You want to ensure that you're implementing mitigation measures that are site specific. So consider specific location, environmental condition, proximity to neighbors, and different specifics for your site. You want to have a communications plan and communicate and a complaint management strategy. You know, get to know your neighbors, let them know what's happening with timing is really important as well. And including in your plan that your goal is always to minimize air emissions and that you'll regularly review the plan to make improvements. So for growing operations, some odors are of course considered part of normal farm practices, but growers to be aware that air contaminants, which are defined as substances that can cause harm, injury, or interference, those must be managed. And once again, I refer you to that AIM code that I've mentioned a few times for more information on those requirements. So we'll talk a bit about processing waste. It's a bit of different, some other regulations may apply to you. So for processing cannabis, different regulations may be applicable, and your operation may require a waste discharge permit to authorize the discharge of air emissions or solid or liquid waste. So to determine if your operation does require a permit, you can send an inquiry to this email address here for waste discharge application inquiries. And also get a lot of questions about hazardous waste. Cannabis extraction may produce hazardous waste, and it is actually your responsibility to determine waste is hazardous and to ensure proper disposal. One option is to reach out to a hazardous waste management company to help classify your waste, and they can also be available to pick up and handle disposal if the waste is classified as hazardous. I've included a link here also to more information on hazardous waste in BC. So I've got a few other resources available to growers that might be of interest. So I've got a few links here. Hopefully you're looking at the, the slide here with the other resources. So I've got a link here to the Integrated Pest Management Group's resource. They made a cannabis, pardon me. They put together some best practices and guidance on pest and disease identification and control. Link there to great information. The second link I have here is on water licenses and approvals. Anyone who is proposing to divert and use water from a stream or an aquifer in BC is required to attain a water license, so please refer to that if you're looking at that information. I also have a link here to the Clean BC Industrial Incentive Program. This can provide financial incentives to some large operations if your emissions are below the industry mark. There's opportunities for some financial incentives. And the last link I have here is the new BC regulatory navigation tool for cannabis production licensing. And this site offers a step-by-step guide to the requirements that are needed when you're planning and developing your cannabis production. So see all of those links for more information. One additional slide here I have is on some recycling and waste management links. So in addition to your agricultural and extraction waste, there's also recycling and safe disposal options available for free for many of the products that you might be using on your growing or processing operation. So recycling programs are available for electronics, lighting equipment, light bulbs, that includes both fluorescents, regular light bulbs, LEDs, batteries, pesticides, small and large appliances, packaging, and many more. These are provincially mandated programs, and the organizations have to provide free recycling across BC. So before disposing of any of these materials, please visit the Recycling Council of BC website, that's rcbc.ca, and they provide a list of what products can be recycled and where the free drop-off locations are throughout the province. So it's a great spot to go for anything that you're unsure about how to dispose of properly. All right, so that brings me to the end of my presentation, environmental management options for cannabis operations in BC. I want everyone to know that I am available by phone and email to assist BC operations in managing waste associated with cannabis growing and processing. I have my email address and my phone number included in the presentation, so hopefully access to the PowerPoint now. I also want to encourage the BC growing and processing community to reach out and feedback. Let me know if there was things that I missed in this presentation, questions you have, or other things that you think other growers would want to know. We're always looking to get more information out there to the community and make sure that we're providing the best information that we can. So please follow the links. I would check out the additional resources and let me know if you have any questions. And thank you so much for listening in on this session. And I look forward to hearing more from the growing community.